Mirror of Might, Ballet in the Cold War. It accomplished what literature and music alone couldn't. It satisfied the high-demanding appetite of the aristocracy. It established diplomacy, weaving together hemispheres under a single form of art. Ballet has been utilized for countless purposes, many of which have mirrored the socio-political context in which they were set. During the Cold War, communism manifested throughout Soviet media, exerting a considerable influence on ballet. It drastically transformed Russia's ballet institutions, from their dancers to their choreography and ultimately their performance success. Thus, in this investigation, I intend to explore the question, to what extent did the Soviet Union's socio-political climate during the Cold War impact the success of the Bolshoi Ballet Company and its dancers' careers? Although it didn't originate in Russia, it grew to prominence in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and in practically no time. To this day, one could argue that those cities are the most ballet hallmarked locations in the world. In its early stages of development, ballet was a demonstration of class and elegance, solely reserved for those with high privilege and wealth, which were necessary to train under the direction of world-renowned masters such as Agrippina Vaganova and Marius Pepita. However, ballet would become something much different during times of oppression and fear. It became dancers' language of freedom, their drive to achieve not only artistic independence, but a broader autonomy over their careers and their lives. A clear instance of this relationship can be observed when we look at the periods before and after the Bolshevik Revolution. During the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, from approximately 1894 to 1917, ballet primarily served to entertain the aristocracy. But his corrupt rule and maintenance of poor living conditions, famine, and a struggling economy sparked tensions between the working class and the Romanovs. So, as Lenin rose to power, ballet had secured an unusually centered role in Soviet society and culture, instead disseminating the salient ideologies of the Soviets' so-called communist agenda. It is the socio-political climate of the Cold War that transformed the Bolshoi Ballet's choreography from being thematically centered around magic and supernatural phenomena to modernist, communist propaganda. Soviet historian Kristina Ezrahi contextualizes this argument with the decline of the drawn ballet, which was the preceding prominent style of ballets filled with fantastical creatures and rigidly classical point work, ignore the clock. Ezrahi claims that the Bolshoi had reached a dead end in terms of choreography, so if Soviet ballet primarily served to promote the communist agenda, then the decline of the drawn ballet would warrant that ballet companies contribute to the Soviet cultural project by creating ballets on Soviet life and topics to educate and shape a new Soviet man. A prime example of the Soviets' attempt to achieve this was Yuri Grigorovich's choreographic revision of The Stone Flower. Although the show was originally based on a fairy tale by Pavel Bazov, the revised version introduced elements that emphasized proletarian themes, as the character Danila, a stone carver, was portrayed as a worker who identified with the struggles of the working class, clearly reflecting the increasingly radical socio-political climate of the Soviet Union. Another perspective suggests that these cheap athletic thrills of modernist choreography, such as in Spartacus, were the Soviets' attempt to beat the West at modernizing dance. Spartacus was described to have iron-jawed heroics and an unabashed sexiness, clearly striving to appeal to the Western modernist palate. This perspective can also be applied to The Stone Flower. Its original choreography recounted how, before the revolution, the bosses oppressed the Russian people of the Urals, how they belittled their traditional folk talents like stone carving, whereas the revised version was accused of modernist tendencies, Western abstraction, and of using insufficiently realistic details that would be more easily digested by audiences abroad. Princeton scholar Simon Morrison further supports this notion. By simplifying what was once rigidly classical point work to flamboyant athleticism, the politics did not matter once the ballet was cleared for production. Thus, that easily digestible choreography of Spartacus had a broad escapist appeal for Soviet audiences, and it entertained despite its ideological content. This suggests that, while the ballet may have contained political themes, some audience members were more interested in the classical elements and sought to enjoy the performance without engaging deeply in the political message. Furthermore, this implies that the ballet's political themes did not necessarily resonate with all audience members. For the most part, the new choreographies were not universally well received by Soviet audiences. Morrison explains that Soviet audiences liked the classics and, in most instances, preferred them to ballets over insurgencies and five-year plans. Because of their poor reception, the Bolshoi's modernist shows had a comparatively short stage life, leading to significant decline in company success. Yet other sources suggest that the decline of the company's success was not due to poor reception, but the deteriorating working conditions of the Bolshoi dancers. Performances were cancelled for reasons as simple as if one or two of the dancers were unable to perform. Thus, young, uncasted dancers were stifled in their development, and still those who were cast danced infrequently and without adequate rehearsal time. Not only does this perspective suggest that working conditions posed a considerable harm to young Bolshoi dancers, but it also emphasizes the extent of control that the state had on the Bolshoi dancers' careers, as many were forced out of their jobs within a moment's notice. By this point, Soviet ballet had become a means of political and artistic repression. Particularly during the Red Scare, several big-name dancers refused to return from Western countries when they visited, while others, such as Galina Ulanova, Marina Semyonova, and Michael Baryshnikov, were moved to the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. Often authorities made such transfers to keep politically suspect artists under a more watchful eye. Though some argued that the principal dancers defected from the Bolshoi company due to a lack of opportunity. A 1970 article by the New York Times details how Natalia Makarova, a dancer with the Bolshoi in the late 1960s, had defected because the Kirov, or the Bolshoi, would not amount to new ballets for her, chaining her to roles that would forever limit her artistic expression. She'd defected because she wanted fame, money, and total stardom, and worldwide recognition. Makarova herself comments how, in the Soviet Union, there is no experimenting with new styles, new techniques, new choreography, such as there is in the West. Interestingly, this contradicts the idea that shows like Spartacus and The Stone Flower were too contemporary, a notion argued by Morrison and Esrahi, but this is likely due to the show's experimental nature and aforementioned short stage life. Artistic expression was limited within the Soviet ballet system, as dancers like Makarova were restricted to a set range of roles. Makarova's defection can be seen as a response to the stifling artistic environment in the Soviet Union. In considering the impact of the Soviet Union's socio-political climate during the Cold War on the success of the Bolshoi ballet and its dancers' careers, it is evident that the poor reception of the politically charged choreographies inhibited both the Bolshoi ballet's success and the freedom of artistic expression by the Bolshoi dancers. Though Soviet ballet did serve as a cultural triumph to some, the Bolshoi's struggle to compete with the modernist ideologies of the West prompted defection of many Soviet dancers to the West. Their actions ultimately underscore the repressive nature of the ballet system, demonstrating how the Cold War not only shaped the geopolitical landscape, but also influenced the world of art, revealing ideological and artistic tensions that defined Soviet ballet.